Can I use this lectern here? Or will I? I hope that y'all are having a good week so far. I thought it'd be nicer to get down here since I'm so lively. I thought that'd be nice, a little bit more intimate. Feel so far away up there, and I feel so much taller. This more like my height. But this feels tall though. Give and take. All right. We are looking tonight at the church at Pergamos. And the one thing that I'm hoping that you will be able to see is both from a Jewish and a Gentile perspective that Jesus is addressing, because he's talking to Christians who include both Jew and Gentile, right? But before we actually look at this, I'm going to spend some time doing some background before we actually read the text. And we're going to read the text twice. Once we get into what we're going to talk about. And then the last part when application is going to be made, because I think all of this will come together at that moment, if it hasn't already. And I believe for those of you that are Bible nerds, and I hope there's a lot of Bible nerds in this room, you might be picking up on a lot of what I'll be saying even before we actually read Revelation 2. So I hope that be the case. With that said, how many of you believe that we have been living in and currently are at the pinnacle of luxury and affordability for everything that we could ever want from a historic standpoint? I would agree. I'm told that if you have running water, you are in the upper echelon of any culture. And some of us in this room would think, running water, that's just a given. And a good portion of our world population does not have running water. They will have to fetch, in the form of billions of people fetch to get water on a daily basis, right? And so as we look at some of the blessings that we have, we can talk about it from a standpoint of, let's see, is it on? Are we ready? This one, the middle one? Oh, wrong one. This one. All right. As far as the blessings that we have, we can look at it from a medical standpoint. And if you have a cold, you can go see a doctor. You might even have the convenience of calling them up or coming in through what's called telemedicine today. We have that kind of ability that we can do that. In years gone by, we did not have that ability, right? There was just no doctor. You'd have to have the doctor, maybe one doctor in town that would come out from wherever he lives, come to your home at some point, right? But today we can go to a plethora of offices. We get to choose. I like this doctor better than that doctor. That's where we've come, right? Or when we was a kid, growing up, you had baseball and football and soccer was pretty new back in the 70s. And nowadays, you have everything under the sun. When I mean for any age, you could be 94 years old and do activities because they're out there, right? And so you have all kinds of that you can do. The foods that we get to eat, the food that we have in so much abundance, I'm not feeling this today. I think I'll throw this away. That's where we are. I would rather eat, right? I'd rather eat out than have to make a meal. How abundant we are in the foods that we have. We go about looking at our government, and we are at a juncture in our society, maybe not you as individuals, but collectively as society, that if there's anything that ever goes wrong, our government needs to step in and take care of our disaster. That's where we the fires of Maui, that's Lahaina. So I'm talking about 25 or 30 of my classmates that have lost all their homes. And that's those that I know. I just found out 2 more classmates yesterday that I had heard that lost their homes. So it's over 30 now. And that's, again, classmates, not all my friends that are not in my own class. And what do we expect? We expect that if our government can give X number of billion to another country that maybe they can give some of it to their own citizens. That's the mentality that we are in our country. We talk about churches. And on one hand, we talk about everyone saying, you have to be at the right church. And of course, that would be the ideal that we would want to do that. But you choose as well. Like, I don't think I'm in the right church, so I'm going to go to that church. Well, I think this church is too much this or too little that. We're going to go switch churches. That's the luxury that we are afforded here. You can go on and on. Activities. I don't know how else to use that. The last one with the masquerade. That's the best I could do. But going to the movies, listening to music, reading books, going out to watch a play, whatever those activities are, they are right here. They are on our devices. It's so at our disposal. We have all kinds of blessings. And wouldn't you know it, as blessed as we are with all of these things, there are times in which we don't give a thought to these blessings. There are times in which we thank God for them, but there are often times we take them to thank God for them, but there are often times we take them for granted. Like, I've waited 5 minutes at this fast food place and I still haven't gotten my food. I can't believe I've waited 2 hours in the emergency room. And we can go on and on. We take for granted a lot of things that most of the world will, some of them can only dream to have these kinds of blessings. And so as we are looking at these things, I want you to see when we look at the life of a resident who lives in Pergamos, what that is like. Because Pergamos is very much the United States. Pergamos is a very wealthy place in the first century. By the time of the first century, Pergamos has reached its pinnacle, and it may not be at the tail end of their existence, but it's not at the very height necessarily, but they are doing pretty good. In fact, it is estimated that there could be as much as 100,000 people living in a very urban Pergamos that you can see right here in this model. This is a 3D model of first century Pergamos. In fact, this model actually goes from the first century into the second century because of some of the buildings that are there that I think were being built during the time of this letter being written to the church, right? And so during the time of Pergamos, typically the average person is going to live down in here, right? And the average person, compared to a lot of other cities, towns, and villages, do not have the luxuries that you as a Pergamene would have. You have the ability, because of the trades that are there, and if you go 20 miles to the west, in fact, if you kind of look at this, just as a reference, this is kind of like the northern point. So this is like north, south, west to east, okay? And if you just go west about 20 miles, you've hit agency, right? And you just go south down here, there's the Mediterranean. You go north over here, there's the Black Sea. So hopefully that's all in your head, right? And if it's not, you have Bibles that typically have these maps. So here's the thing about this, though. With the activity that's going on, Pergamos is one of those towns that are so wealthy. It's wealthy from a bunch of revenue streams. In some places, they're only wealthy because the military presence there. In some places, you're wealthy because you are on a major trade route on the port. In some places, you're wealthy because of, well, Pergamos is wealthy for all kinds of reasons. You will have in Pergamos a place where we would now refer to as a hospital, right? Pergamos is one of the very first places in the world because of the god Asclepius. That was the god of healing. Pergamos has this hospital where people from all over, including your senators from the Roman Empire, that would come to Pergamos to be healed, right? You would be, as an average citizen, having the luxury of that service. You would have the luxury of being able to go to one of these places. Here's the gymnasium right over here. You would have the luxury of being able to go to one of these places. Here's a gymnasium right over here. You have the marketplace down over here and up over here. You've got a amphitheater that will, by my voice right now, 10 to 15,000 people in that amphitheater. By this voice, no microphone needed, not even having to shout. It's an amazing architectural wonder, if you will, in that it was made 10 to 15,000. You would have the ability, because of these places, to go down through the valleys. Oh, sorry, go back to the other way. The valleys down in here and around here, and then up on the other side where there'd be more people living here on the next mountain or hill, to have all your sheep, your goats, and other animals that you would have. And by the way, there was a plethora of animals because this was the birthplace of parchment. And so what they would do is, if you're an average person, you would have this animal and animals that might have been worshipped to the various gods. And there are 17 temples in Pergamos. You would take those animals, and after having worshiped your various gods, you would take the skin. And from the skin, they had invented the parchment, and they would make out of their sheep, which would be the best parchment, right? The most cost-efficient parchment that you can have, where you can have a good, now 6 foot by 8 foot type of a square, and that would be cut into smaller pieces, and there's your writing material. That's what they would have. And you're walking through all of these places with all of these stores and all the activities that you can take. And if you wanted, you could go to the theater that is right over here in this amphitheater, and you would listen to the plays that would take place throughout the year. It's an amazing thing to live in Pergamos in the first century. Again, as we're talking about, when you talk about running water today in the 21st century, Pergamos, like, they are, what's a place in California that has the technology? Napa Valley? No, not Napa, that's a vineyard place. Silicon Valley, of course, yes. So that's like this place right here with all the technology that is provided. And so lots going on. If we just zero in a little bit into Pergamos, you get to see some of these activities. And so among them, as I was mentioning to you, was the idea of that's a sheepskin that you would have stretched out, and they would stretch it to such a point where they could then cut it into its pieces and have your parchment. And it's just absolutely beautiful, just running your fingers. And you can tell just by running your fingers what kind of parchment it was, or by looking at the parchment, oh, that's goat, that's sheep, or that's some other animal that's there, by virtue of this trade that you are a part of. And then that would be taken over to the ports, traded all over the world, as they would compete against those Egyptians that had a pretty large papyrus industry. In fact, it is because of this that Pergamos had a library that rivaled Egypt. The Library of Alexandria was so much in competition by the time that Pergamos came along with their library. Pergamos by this time had over 200,000 volumes. Y'all. 200,000 volumes in the first century is incredible. That's this city. So they are well known for all that they have and what they're doing. And so this is a zeroing in on the top of this area. So most of your fortified cities were at the very tops of mountains, right? And just as a couple of things that I want you to note before we actually get into the scripture once again, is the idea that this Acropolis, that's what an Acropolis is. The city is on top of the mountain. Even though the residents might live lower, this is the most important part of the city, this whole area right up here, right? You have the palaces up in here in this background here. You've got this temple right here is the Temple of Athena. You've got the Temple of Zeus right over here. You've got Dionysus' temple right over here. I mean, all kinds of stuff going on that's in this place. So you are afforded this ability. But here's where I want to just zero in a little bit on some of this, because as we go through some of this city, I want you to now think of your life in this city as a Christian. Because as you walk this sacred way, which is what this pathway, it goes all the way past this way, going further west, and just due west, or east, excuse me. You have this pathway, and that sacred pathway is where a lot of these temple sites are, in addition to being up to the main temple sites. You are having animals sacrificed every day. And you may have gotten your meat from the marketplace that had been given over to some of these places of worship. That might make you think of 1 Corinthians chapter 8, right? About meat sacrificed to idols. As you walk through here, as I was mentioning earlier, you might go to one of these plays. Well, most of your plays, most of your governing that took place there, most of your activities are tied and interwoven with pagan worship. Just about every facet of life. If you are looking at politics, you're going to have to worship the emperor. A lot of the politics is tied to worshiping of the emperor. And you have right over here, this top place right here, the highest place in all of Pergamos is the Trajan temple. I think it's called the Trajaneum, I think is what the name of it is. And that's a place where, depending on the governing officials, depending on the governor, you might be forced to worship Caesar. And if you don't, you may not be in good standing with the government. You may lose your job. You may be singled out in what you can and cannot do, in what activities are afforded you and not afforded you as a local citizen. This is some of the things that you're thinking about as a Christian. You go further on into the life, and you get to start seeing about some of these activities. And one of the things that is very clear that Pergamos was afforded that most major cities did not enjoy was this idea of being able to have full authority as a governor. And what I mean by full authority as a governor is the idea that you as governor over this area, or proconsul over this area, if you made an edict, it would be as if Caesar himself made the edict. Let that sink in. Herod did not have that kind of authority. Herod could not have the life of an individual taken of his own accord. But if you're in Pergamon, you could. So if you are a citizen living in here, you now have a pressure on you that in other places was not afforded. You would have to go to court, wait for Caesar to render any kind of a judgment. But if you're in Pergamon, the buck stops with him, right, as a leader. And so this idea of giving is something similar to known as a double-edged sword, because you are having the ability to judge guilt or innocence, right? Going further, in this case, this is the temple of Zeus. Zeus would be like the god of the gods, right, for the empire. And from Zeus, you would have his sister, Demeter, his daughter, Athena, and some of the other Olympian gods and goddesses that are reigning and ruling through this area, but it all starts with him. So every part of your life in this town is surrounded by pagan worship. I don't know if we can appreciate when you're that steeped and embedded into idolatry that it doesn't somehow rub off on Christians. In fact, that is the reason for this letter. I'd like for us to begin by reading in Revelation chapter 2, verses 12 through 17. And I want you to now engage your mind as a believer into this letter that has been written. because as we go further into the text here, we're going to see some things that I believe are very, very pertinent. All right? And I'm going to hold this place up for you while we read this passage. In verse 12 of Revelation 2, it says, "And to the angel of the church in Pergamum write, the words of him who has the sharp two-edged sword. I know where you dwell, where Satan's throne is, and yet you hold fast to my name. And you did not deny my faith even in the days of Antipas, my faithful witness, who was killed among you, where Satan dwells. But I have a few things against you. You have some there who hold to the teaching of Balaam, who taught Balak to put a stumbling block before the sons of Israel so that they might eat food sacrificed to idols and practice sexual immorality. And so also you have some who hold the teaching of the Nicolaitans. Therefore, repent. If not, I will come to you soon and war against them with the sword of my mouth. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. The one who conquers, I will give some of the hidden manna, and I will give him a white stone with a new name written on the stone that no one knows except the one who receives it. Amen. What's interesting is I gave you some of the images, and I hope you picked up on some of the passage already. But I want to add a couple of more images here, because if you are a Christian and you are sick, you want a doctor. Today, we live in a mindset that we take it for granted that we have the ability to go to see a doctor. And I don't ever think, is this doctor tied to any idolatry? I mean, have any of you gone to a doctor's office going, I wonder if Dr. Black, Dr. Bob is an idolater? Anyone do that? Like worshiping gods. See, Asclepius is the god of healing. And if you are a citizen, if you're going to go to get healed, you're going to have to go through a whole pagan ritual. You walk the sacred way, you come to a bathhouse, and you take this sacred bath, you get cleansed, you come into the gateway of the Asclepion, right, the hospital, if you will, and you go through whatever protocol that you are going to be seen, and they're going to determine what kind of ailment that you have. And based upon the ailment, they have certain rooms, dormitory rooms in this Asclepion. And it is from there that depending on your healing, they put you in a room, put you in a trance, probably drug you, is my understanding. And then you're in a room while asleep where snakes come on your body. Because it was well believed that the snakes had some magical ability to heal, right? That'd be part of that venom. And so they believe that these snakes are sacred. Here you are as a Christian. What do? God, I am sick. I've got a bad fever. I don't know if I'm going to live. There is no Tylenol, no ibuprofen. There is no surgical means, if you will. What you have is this pagan doctor. And in fact, this stone right here, if you were to be able to read in Greek, that stone is a list of every name that is healed by those snakes. And with the name, it told you what the problem was and how that person had been healed. Lots and lots of these stones are columns all around. See that one over there, one over there, one back there. All of these are columns with all the names, and you'll get to have records of just untold amounts of people who had been healed by these sacred snakes, by Asclepius, the god of healing. What do? You have, in fact, this was a similar type of an icon or a statue, the statue that I think we're very familiar with, right? This is where our statue comes from Pergamos. So if you take the Hippocratic Oath and you're a doctor, or you see on the ambulance, when the ambulance passes by, that's from Pergamos. And so this is what everything is tied to. What do you do if you are sick? What do you do when you're bored out of your mind and you want to be entertained? What do you do when you are hungry for meat and meat is expensive and the best place in town is pagan meat market? What do you do? These are the things that Christians are going through. What happens when you, as a Jew, go to Jerusalem on this day of Pentecost and you happen to learn that not Zeus, but Jesus is the King of Kings? Now, as a Jew, you may not have ever thought that Zeus was ever the King of Kings, but would you have ever thought Jesus was? And you learn about this Jesus, and you hear about this Jesus who is able to raise people from the dead, who is able to heal people in ways that Asclepius could never have done. You have a king in Jesus as a governing ruler that is over your life, and he wants you to have life abundantly. Not someone where your name is hanging in the balance with every word. You have someone that you can look to in every facet of your life, from nourishment, that rather than praying to the goddess of Demeter during the harvest, which is where we're at right now here in Middle Tennessee. Isn't this harvest time right now? I was told that one of the men supposed to lead singing tonight is having to work in the field. Harvest time. Do you pray to the goddess of harvest? Do you pray to Demeter? Or do you learn that there is this one named Jesus who came into this world and he fed 5,000 people? And he is regarded as a true manna that come from heaven. Do you go through in your mind's eye these questions as you are listening to this letter that is being written to you, that is stating that while you are commended for holding fast the name of Jesus, I've got a few things against you. The main thing that I have against you is that you are among you people who call upon my name, but who compromise their faith in me. That's who's in your midst. Are you one of them? And it's as if Jesus is standing or sitting at the table with his disciples, and he says to his disciples this night before he goes to the cross, I'm telling you right now, one of you will betray me. And one by one, they go through the table and they're asking the question, is it I, Lord? And if you are any type of a child of God who wants to be faithful to God, you're asking yourself, is it me, Lord? Am I compromising my walk because I want this food and I need this food and I need this healing and I need... And you have some of them who are saying, just to cover all my bases, Yahweh, I love you. You are my God, the one and only. But just in case, I might need to pray to Athena or Demeter or Dionysus or Zeus, or you can go on and on with the list. What do I do? These are the things. If you go to Pergamos for worship, Zeus is the one. If you are hearing about Dionysus, you've learned that he is a god that has promised you life after death. Dionysus, interestingly enough, is born of a god and a human. Zeus and a woman, a virgin woman, mind you. Does that sound familiar? This is the pagan version of our Father and Mary. This is Zeus in the pagan world. And Dionysus promised you that if you drink till you are drunk out of your mind, and if you eat meat till you have just filled your belly, till you throw up. I'm not making this up. There are places that are meant in the temple of Dionysus for you to eat to all you can eat, buffet style, and then have all the drink you can have, and then there are these vomitariums. Then you're worthy of life after death. This is the same god, Dionysus, in addition to wine and meat, and it's raw meat, by the way. It's not been burnt on the altar. It is strictly raw. That this god, according to sources that I've not been able to verify, I was talking to Eric and Sarah about this. The word is that you could not be married in Pergamos unless you went to this festival. And the festival began to have such a reputation that eventually the Roman government had to ban this festival. People had died in this festival. And I'm just going to leave your imagination to you over what happens over when you have such drunkenness, such revelry that take place. That's Dionysus. We mentioned Demeter. I mentioned the Asclepius, the god of healing. Athena, the goddess of wisdom, because she came straight out of Zeus's head and was born as an adult, unlike all the other gods and goddesses. So if you wanted wisdom, you go to that temple, Temple Athena. And of course, you are made to worship the Caesar. And so right now, Trajan is not in power. In fact, Nero had already gone through persecution of Christians, depending on your view of when you think Revelation was written. And you are not yet in Domitian's power, where more Christians are going to be persecuted. So this is somewhere in between, depending again on your view of this time frame. This temple is being built from my vantage point. But that's life. And you are a Christian living in this town with all the wonderful luxuries that is in existence, but it's all tied to paganism. What do you do? I want to reread this text, and I want you to let all this last part sink in for what we are talking about because of what I'm going to say. Again, rereading in chapter 2, verse 12 following. To the angel of the church of Pergamum write, the words of him who has the two-edged sword. Here is Jesus, who really is the, is it gladii? I forget the term, this actual word for double-edged sword. Instead of Pergamos that has this authority like Caesar, Jesus is the one who has all authority. So what John is doing in this vision that has been given by the Spirit for this letter being written from Jesus to the churches is he's writing that not Pergamos, but Jesus is over all. He continues and he says this in verse 13. I know you well where Satan's throne is. Well, imagine if you ever were to say, I wonder where Satan's throne would be. It'd be the place where anything that is so anti-Christ exists. And let me tell you right here, this fits the bill. Of all the places in the 7 churches of Asia Minor that you could have, this place fits the bill. Where Satan's throne is, where Satan dwells. Why? Everything, every aspect of society is tied to these gods and goddesses that are not God. Everything that appeals to the flesh of man that is contrary to God's nature is found right here. This is the dwelling place of Satan. It'd be like, hey, Lot, where do you want to live? Tell you what, Sodom and Gomorrah looks pretty good. Where Satan dwells. And Lot was a righteous man, but he had temptations, no doubt. Think about how his mind was when he offered his own daughters up to the evil men of the city. You start compromising. Even righteous Lot, compromise. These are things that are taking place here by Christians. And when you're in the middle of it, you don't think of compromising. You're just like, well, this is a blessing. This is a freedom that I have. And someone else looking from an outside lens, looking at your life, would say, I think you're compromising your faith. No, I'm not compromising my faith. It's easy for it to happen when it's you. And when it's me, I'm blind to it. When it's someone else, it's more easy to see. This is the picture that is given. So W.M. Ramsey said this, and this takes place in the next verse that we're going to be looking at, when he says, I have a few things against you about those who hold to the doctrine of Balaam, as well as those who hold to the doctrine of Nicolaitans. Those are saying that those two separate situations mean the same thing. It's a strengthened form of you all have those in your midst who are compromising, and they, not you, but they need to be dealt with. Ramsey says, this school of thought, the school of the Nicolaitans, the teaching doctrine of the Nicolaitans, this school of thought and conduct played an important part in the church of the first century. It affected most of all the well-to-do classes in the church. Pergamos and Corinth are right on par with each other with this. Corinth with their Isthmian games, and you have Pergamos with their Olympic-like style games. Corinth with their theaters, Pergamos with theirs. All the monies from their trades in Corinth, same with Pergamos. So what Ramsey is saying is that those who are well-to-do in the Lord's church were those who are most affected. That those who had the most temptation to retain all that they could of the established social order and customs of the Greco-Roman world, in other words, they're influenced by Hellenism, and who, by their more elaborate education, had been trained to take an artificial view of life. In other words, you got the best education, you got all that money could buy and offer you in life, you are the one that is most going to struggle with this and maybe most difficult to see that you're being compromised by. That's what Ramsey is saying. And so when Jesus is referring to the church, you have those who are Gentile Christians and that they can look at the lifestyle of paganism that they've been called out of. And then you have Jews who are living there that may not have those exact forms of temptation per se, although some Jews did. You would have those temptations of wealth from a Jewish perspective, where you compromise your relationship with God. And he goes back to the days of Balaam, the prophet, Numbers chapter 25. You can read it, chapters 22, 23, 24, but chapter 25 in particular. After Balaam had unsuccessfully cursed Israel and successfully blessed Israel to the dismay and shock of Balak, king of Moab, he then somehow is able to get Balak to whisper in the ears of these Israelites. And through his being this prophet, wanting money, is able to influence the Israelites to have relations with the Midianites, to bow down to idols of the Midianites. And sometimes you have Christians in the first century at Pergamos who've been known to be doing just that. Compromising. That it's Jesus and these gods. Jesus and you just fill in the blank. Not, you must come to the Father through me, because I am the way, the truth, and life. Not that Jesus is exclusive. And so these are things that are very important that Jesus is saying, listen, I need to be Lord of your life. I am the one who truly has a two-edged sword. What man does to you is only in the flesh. Fear no man, Matthew chapter 10, verse 27, 28, following. All he can do is take our physical life, but fear him who's able to destroy both body and soul in hell. That's what Jesus says you need to fear, or who you need to fear. And so as is true of Balaam, is true of the Nicolaitans, is this idea of compromise. And that's really what this entire book, this whole letter this vision John is about. That you're going to be going through times of persecution, times of trial. And what are you going to do? Are you going to bow down and compromise, or are you going to stand firm, even if it means your physical life? And I think because we live in the United States of America, where we've had so much affluence and so much peace, and when I mean by peace, I'm not talking about internal national affairs strife that we've been experiencing. I'm talking about the fact that there's no country that has been bombing our borders year in and year out, like most countries of the world. We've had so much peace that we've sat on our laurels. And the gospel has been watered down in our country. And we as Christians, we fight about silly stuff that we've made as mountains rather than the molehills that most of the world in the name of Christianity don't even fight over it or even think worthy of even discussing. Because we've compromised. And so I'm asking you tonight, when you read this letter, when you go home and you look at all that is going on, and if Jesus were to rewrite this letter and give it to the church, maybe in Fayetteville, Tennessee, right? Because Fayetteville, Tennessee, it may not be Williamson County, but we're in the top 1% of the world in Fayetteville, Tennessee. If that doesn't jog your memory of going, or jog your mind to think, wow, for real? Because sometimes we like to compare ourselves with ourselves. And sometimes the comparing is with someone else that has maybe more than me. That's the easy thing to do. But we never typically compare ourselves with those that don't have anything compared to us. And there's so many. And if you were to rewrite that letter and modernize it for Fayetteville, Tennessee, what symbols would he use as an apocalyptic message? Apocalypsis is imagery from a heavenly perspective that is tied to a reality for its ultimate end. That's the vision that John has for the church at Pergamos. What imagery do we see today when we look at wealth, when we look at societal issues, when we look at recreation, when we look at government, when we look at our worship? What symbols do you see? And are you self-aware? Are you biblically aware of where we lack and where we need to repent? Because Jesus made it clear, the one who has this two-edged sword said, I will come quickly and I will judge them with the words of my mouth. The last thing, and we'll be done for tonight, is the idea that he says, to him who overcomes, I will give him that hidden manna. Remember that? If I go back to that, see if I can go back to this place. I'll give him hidden manna and a white stone. And by the way, there's no consensus of the idea of what this white stone was all about, because it is true that in this time, the proconsul, the governors, used to have a white stone and a black stone. And when judging your case, they would either give you a white stone or the black stone, and that you would know is the ruling. Jesus said, I will write your name on a white stone. There's where your true healing comes from. Not from Asclepius, but from Jesus. And what he's doing is he's letting you know that what you think you have right in front of your eyes, right here in Fayetteville, Tennessee, in this particular county, in this state, in this country, what you have right before your eyes may be misleading you. But Jesus will not mislead you. So come to me, he says. Know that I am the King of all kings. There is no God beside me. Come to me and I will give you all your nourishment, all your harvest. I will give you every imaginable thing for you to live an abundant life forever. Amen. If you need the Lord, here's your invitation. Know that he gives you everything. That's his promise to you. And you can have it right now. It's together.